Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Ask 5. I'm your host, Monica Molinaro, and today I'm joined by Carol. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Do you mind introducing yourself to the audience really quickly before we get started?
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Carol Wissa. I'm a PhD student here at the Institute of Health Sciences Education at McGill.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Now, do you also mind introducing the question that we asked our 5 for this episode?
Yes. So it is, when do you know that you're done? Like a project, dissertation, or a line of work?
Perfect. Let's see what our 5 had to say.
Natalie Boo. I'm a pediatric anesthesiologist here at McGill University. I guess I'm associate professor in the department. I'm also an associate member of the Institute of Health Sciences Education. I'm presently assistant dean of fellowships at the PGME level at McGill.
Jacqueline Torti. So I am an assistant professor in the Department of Medicine and a scientist at S3.E2, the Center for Education, Research, and Innovation. And those are both part of the Schulich School of Medicine and Dentistry at Western University.
Lara Varpio. I'm a professor of medicine at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania and the co-director of medical education research at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia.
So today I'm joined by
Deep Sani, and I am presently enjoying being the president of McGill University, president and vice chancellor. And I'm also a professor in the Faculty of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences.
Robert Sternzis, Associate Professor of Pediatrics and Health Sciences Education, and Wendy McDonald Chair in Pediatric Medical Education at McGill.
How do you know when you're done?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's an easier question if you're working on a science project where you have, you know how many people you're supposed to recruit or what your N was supposed to be, and then you reach that N, and then you have the data, and then you can analyze it. And I find that there are a lot of other projects, especially now that I've delved a little bit into like qualitative things. That was my big struggle when I was doing my master's in qualitative methodology, and I was using qualitative methodology, that is. It's like, okay, how do I know when this is going to be enough? And that I still not sure, honestly. I think part of it is talking about your work and if you're able to, like present it either in poster form or just even presenting it with a group of your colleagues and getting feedback and hearing like, oh, this is the part that is really interesting about your results, and then you can sort of see, oh, is that something? Is that a theme that I need to pursue further or not? Like maybe that was enough, and so I don't know. I think I'm going to try to submit something for an abstract, see what the response is, submit something for a publication, see what that response is, and then kind of see. Of course, it's nice to have an idea beforehand that I'm probably going to need this many people approximately and get to this point. But I think sometimes the data will take you into a different direction, and then you kind of then have to decide, okay, is that enough? And hopefully with your research collaborators, you come to a decision as to, yes, this is probably enough. And if we have anything else, it's not really going to add any more to this. So it doesn't really answer the question, but that's my experience, I guess.
But in a way, you kind of have answered the question because you've mentioned things like abstracts, things like that. Like those have a due date, right? So you know that an abstract needs to be submitted by this point.
Right.
But you've also noted there's going to be times where you're doing a particular research project where things might take a little bit longer than you expected, or your analysis moves in a direction that maybe you weren't anticipating to begin with. And so sometimes the done dates or the due dates aren't as finite as you think they are.
Yeah, I find that that's very hard to control. It is helpful to have deadlines. The grant is due a certain time and the abstract is due a certain time. So you can get out whatever you have at that time and where you think it's going at that time, obviously. And sometimes that gives you some idea of, if it's rejected, you kind of think, okay, this is not where it's supposed to be at. It also could mean that, this is just not the right venue for this type of work. So that you kind of have to make that differentiation there. But that may be a way of discerning that the work is ready or is done or getting there, at least. I don't. Yeah. Otherwise, I'm not really sure how to tell, honestly, other than asking other people for their opinion. What do you think? And people who've read a lot of papers and do a lot of reviews, for example, would probably be very helpful in saying, yeah, I think that you can publish that in this kind of way or in this kind of light, or if you highlight this aspect of the work, for example, and that's always useful. But sometimes you as a researcher, you're so involved in your own research, it's harder to take that step back to see that there are stuff that still needs to be done or needs to be clarified. So you have a different perspective of it. So either that step back or having somebody else help you with that. Yeah.
So when do you know something is done? When do you know a project is done? When do you know it's time to wrap up a dissertation? When do you know that a line of work is finished?
It is a great question and one that I still struggle with sometimes. But I'm reminded I had a great mentor during my PhD at the University of Alberta, Maria Mayan. She's a qualitative methodologist, and she once told us that the best qualitative research creates more questions than it does answers. And I feel like that's true of any research or research project. So often if I get to a stage where I'm excited about future research that might come out of this, where it's led to more questions that I want to ask and areas that I want to dig deeper into, or where I've, kind of had a newfound passion for something else I want to go explore as a result or from a tangent from the work that I've done. I think that's a pretty good sign that, you've wrapped up the project and it's come to a close. But at the same time, I also reflect on the ebbs and flows of projects kind of ending, but also semi-continuing in the background. As HPE scholars and scholars in general, we're always thinking about knowledge mobilization efforts. And so even when a project's come to a close, we present at conferences, we publish our work, we might share some insights in a blog or a newsletter, things like that. And so the conversation around the research tends to continue. And so for me, I think that's where the challenging part is. I think I know when data analysis has kind of ended and I can write something, but the project for me sometimes doesn't ever really come to a close. Sometimes it just leads to new insights and further research for the next project. So it's a little bit tricky to navigate. But I think, one of the things of knowing when the project is done is just through practice and having a sense that this is, a completed research project. It comes through mentorship, during graduate studies, having a supervisor say, you've collected enough data. I think you've got a really thorough understanding of your research question here. You've engaged in the literature very thoroughly. You're at a point now where I think the project is done and of good quality and you can move forward. So those would probably be key things for me, knowing that it's leading to further insights and inquiries and passions, that you have some mentorship and guidance, and just through experience and practice, you kind of learn.
So it sounds like there's kind of different waves of being done, right? Done data collection, done analysis, done writing, and then you bring up an interesting point about whether the translation side or the mobilization side is ever done, and maybe it pops up in unexpected ways. But rather than thinking about when something is done, when is something good enough?
Good enough is, a different question than being done for sure. I think good enough comes from working with great mentors and great peers who kind of lead you to learn that it's good enough. I think a lot of us in HPE as, scholars, physicians, clinician scholars, we tend to be perfectionists and we tend to be very driven. And so sometimes there's always room for improvement, right? You can always dig deeper into the analysis. You can always re-engage in the literature in different ways. You can always continuously work on improving the writing. But eventually it gets to a stage where you need to kind of submit it, have other people see it, get peer review and feedback. And that's really helpful. And so for me, it's different in different fields too. The standard of what's good enough in some fields differs from what it looks like in other fields and depends on your stage of career too, I would say. A thesis or a dissertation and it being good enough looks very different than, a small project that you engage in as a research associate or, a pilot project that you're working on. Mm-hmm. And so it depends on context as well.
So to make the question even more specific, what makes something publishable?
Publishable, yes, is a great question. And I would say you really don't know until you try. We always, not always, but there's always the chance of a desk rejection, and that happens from time to time. Sometimes it's based on the quality of the manuscript. Sometimes it's the fit with the journal or the niche that they're looking for. But I think a lot of it comes from the peer review and really the critique and critical feedback that you get from others outside of your own scope of research and outside of your own little network. So that's a really valuable resource to know whether or not you've hit the mark. And I think before we get to that stage, we often really rely on the mentorship of those more experienced than us to let us know. So in our center, we always do friendly peer reviews of one another's work, which is extremely helpful. I think one of the challenges with your own work is you're so close to it and it's so clear to you. So having someone else who's a little bit removed from your work but still kind of understands the context of HPE or health professions education is really helpful. And they can kind of give you a friendly peer review to let you know, I think you're, missing some detail here. This needs to be elaborated on further, or have you considered this? And that really helps to improve the work. So I'd say some mentorship, whether that's from someone more senior in a supervisory role or some peer mentorship and peer feedback's really helpful to know whether or not you've made the mark. And then, just through practice and through the peer review process, you kind of learn what they're looking for and really how to sell your work.
So if you're looking at a piece of work that you're involved in, let's say with some colleagues or some learners, and that call is on you, right? Saying, okay, it's good. It's time to go into the peer review process. What are the things that you're looking for? What are the things that's letting you know that it's good to go?
So some of the things that I would look for is that it's been thoroughly engaged in the literature. So you've done an updated lit review. You're really aware of where the current conversations are and what's happening and how this particular piece adds to it. I think that's really important. Oftentimes, the biggest piece with qualitative research is in the methodological details. And so being really transparent and clear about the methods that went into it, and also really detailing the rigor or the approach to rigor that you took throughout your research, outlining things like methodological coherence and just crafting a really clear narrative so that the reader can get a sense of what you did and how you did it and be able to evaluate that. And then I think you want the results to really have something new or novel, something that really kind of pushes the boundaries of our understanding about that particular research question. And the discussion, again, is connected back to having a good sense of the literature and being able to say where it fits in the current conversations. So sometimes it's hard to know whether or not it meets the mark. Sometimes it depends on the reviewer and the journal. But most often when you're not really ever working in isolation, oftentimes whether you're a student, graduate student, research associate, or a faculty member, you've got a great team that you're working with. And so often it's a team decision that, I think we've got it to this stage. We've worked as hard as we can on it. I think it's at a point now where we've done what we can with it, and passing it off to someone else to get some expert, review and feedback is what we need to see if we need to make any improvements.
Awesome. That is way more formal than the answer I normally give, which is if you open it and it makes you nauseous, it's time to go.
It's time to go. I like that too.
It's just time to go.
Yeah.
When do you know that you're done? Something like a project, a grant, anything of the sort.
Right. So, it's challenging when we have projects that we design that have, or grants where we have to write a timeline of beginning and ending. Timelines, for me, done isn't about a timeline. Time is something that's very variable and, emotionally experienced in lives, and timelines are the first thing to go. But how do I know when a project is finished is when I've worked with a team and we've come to an understanding of the data, of the interpretations that resonates really deeply. And having done this work for a while now and having been an avid reader, if I understand how it's contributing or how it's different, then I know we're done. If I know the therefore statement, I know we're done. If I don't know the therefore statement, we're not done yet. A therefore statement is the sentence in my mind that you say at the end of the paper, and therefore the study is important because. If you can't write that sentence, like before you write the paper, you're not done. You're not ready. Sometimes as I'm writing, it does, like writing is thinking, so sometimes it changes as I go. But if you don't even have a sense of that, then for me, I'm not done thinking about it.
How do you know that something is publishable?
That's a harder question because publishable in different journals means different things. When you have a deep and robust understanding of the literature, if what you're studying, if your therefore statement is a reasonable addition to the literature. But the other part of it is knowing where you're going to publish, because in different journals and different spaces and domains, something that's publishable will look different. So one of the best things I've done in my career to try to figure out when it's publishable is to read broadly and deeply in individual journals. So every couple of years, I pick a journal and I just read the whole year's worth of materials. Okay, so I don't read everything because there's like a bunch of them. I'm just not going to read that. But I'll read all the abstracts and I'll read more than 50% of the manuscripts just to get a sense of how this journal's conversations are moving. And then when I'm working on a paper and I've gotten my statement of my therefore statement, this research is important because, and then because I've spent so much time in the journals, I know where it fits. I know how it could fit. Now, editors don't always agree, neither do reviewers, but that's how I think of it.
How do you know when you're done?
Oh, done as in research.
Yeah, so done a project, you're done a dissertation, you're done on a grant.
I would go to the question you have asked. So, I assume that every researcher who embarks on a project, which leads to a dissertation or a paper or whatever else, grant, they have a question in mind. You're done when you feel that you've answered the question. At least you have advanced on answering the question. I think that's the key thing. And I've seen it that you're done, but you don't feel you're done. But that's also the beauty of science, that you're never done. But there is that stage, and you know it. It's an intuition. You know when you're done, when you feel that I have made enough progress on answering the question I set out to answer.
Can I follow up on that a little bit? In terms of answering the question, I think about some kinds of research where maybe the goal isn't necessarily to find an answer. Maybe the goal is we need to think about this particular problem in a different way, or we need to approach this issue in a different way. So could it also be that maybe the goal isn't necessarily always to answer, but even to just address the question or kind of move knowledge forward?
But that's an answer.
That counts as an answer.
Yeah, that counts as an answer. A no is just as much an answer as yes is. And we have to accept that. I mean, it's true that many people would start, like it's, you have some sense of the answer you think you're going to get when you ask a question. At least the science has advanced that far. So people do start with some assumption in their head, even if they may not actually put it on paper. But getting a complete opposite answer to that is as important as getting the answer that you thought you were going to get. This area that I was talking about, the research that I just mentioned, we actually started with an entirely different assumption. We thought we were on to a chemical reaction in plants whereby they take chloride ion, which is toxic in plant environment, and volatilize it by conversion it to chloromethane. Mm-hmm. And there's an enzyme that plants have that enzyme, or many plants have it. What we found was, in the end, that wasn't true. In fact, actually, the whole thing was based on a paper that was published in Science, which got us thinking about this. And it turned out that wasn't true. What was actually happening was, and I'm going to get into some deep biochemistry now, chemistry, that it was actually the enzyme. There was an enzyme that was methylating thiol compounds, complex thiols. But because of the chemical similarity between a thiol and a chloride ion, thiols are pseudohalides, and that the enzyme would accept chloride as a substrate and methylate it. So when you actually put it in chloride environment, yes, it would work like that, but that was not the natural function of the enzyme. So the answer to the first question ended up being no, but it opened a whole new area of metabolism, which actually was very exciting. Now, coming to when you think you're done, we never answered all the questions that could be answered there. We never fully elucidated the entire pathway, but we made enough progress that we left it for somebody else to pursue from there. And for me, and I was moving on at that point. This was actually also a time when I was getting deeper and deeper into administration, and so doing research became harder. So we folded, and we declared victory. And I actually haven't followed. I no longer follow that area now, just don't have time. But my assumption is that some people have done some pretty cool things based on what we did.
I think that's a fair assumption to make.
Yeah.
And you also bring up a really interesting point too, and that being that part of the research process is that your assumptions or that your questions can change. Yeah. It's not like you need to start with this one singular assumption or one singular question and then have to follow it all the way through, because things might come up during the research process that ultimately change your track a little bit.
My entire life is like that, honestly. I'll share something with you, which actually is, if there's a supervisor listening, I think that would be useful for them. I grew up in India, where I did my master's degree there, where the established way of supervising students was you get into a professor's lab, and then they'll sit down. Once you've settled in, they'll sit you down and they'll tell you, this is what you're going to do, right? Most of the people did that because you had to fit in their project and so on. I arrive in Australia, do my PhD, and my supervisor, Don Espinal, he gave me a week or so and to settle down. And then one day said, okay, Deep, come to the office, let's talk about your research. And I sat down and he said, so what are you going to work on? Now, it seems like a simple question. For me, it was like, wow, I'm being asked what I want to do. And I had come with certain thoughts in my mind. I mean, at that time, I had done my master's degree, so I had some ideas as to what kind of things I would be interested in. I wasn't expecting the question. So I just, off the top of my mind, I gave an answer. I said, I want to work on, this aspect of the nitrate reductase enzyme, which is a key enzyme for nitrogen metabolism in plants. And he thought for a second and he says, it seems very interesting, but upstairs in biochemistry, they're working on this, and I don't think we want to go into competition with them. So then he said, what else? Is there anything else you would? Like, he never, ever told me what it is that I wanted to do. He wanted me to come up with what I wanted to do. And of course, implicit in that was that I've come to his lab to be supervised by him. I would work on something that he can supervise. And I didn't have an answer. He says, well, why don't you come over for dinner at home? We'll talk about it. What are you doing next Saturday? So we sat down, we talked about things there, and I came up with a project that male sterility, that's where it started. And actually, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, let's go back. So I came up with a project which was very well aligned with his field. And I started on that. It was very exciting. I thought we were going to have a massive breakthrough. Our next paper is coming up in Nature already in my head. And I worked on that for about 8 or 9 months and realized that our assumptions were all wrong. Right? And I went back to him reluctantly. This is still young graduate student, international students who's also scared of this big name scientist he's working with. And I told him, I said, look, I put all the data in front of him. I said, Don, I think I made the wrong assumption here. This particular gene is not present on one chromosome, that this is actually a multi-gene trait, and it's controlled from multiple chromosomes. And the data is just not showing that my assumption was right, that I was actually going to find the gene for this particular process. And he looked at it, very bright man. He knew it right away. He says, yep, you're right. What else do you want to do now? So I changed my project again. Again, that too happened over dinner at his home. It used to happen often. And all that to say that keep your mind open to new possibility and keep your mind open to failure. And so that was first was a very quick failure where he said he shot it down right away. Second one took 8 or 9 months and I shot it down. And then the next project, male sterility, I went on to publish 5 papers out of that. Some of them still get cited. This was my first paper was in 1982. I have seen recent citations for that paper.
Really?
Yeah. 1980, sorry, not 1982, 80. So and it worked out. It actually launched my career. So a failure led to something that became even more interesting, more exciting.
When do you know you're done? So a project, a master's, thesis, anything of the sort?
So it depends. I think it's different depending on the type of project or the type of thing you're working on. I think when it comes to research, part of that really relies and leans heavily on methodology. So if you're doing quantitative work, you've got power calculations and sample sizes and that sort of stuff. If you're doing more qualitative work, which is where I live, you're kind of always looking at, have I answered the research question? Typically that's done in teams. So teams are really helpful in helping you figure that out. But I think one way to feel confident or to kind of know you're done when you're doing research is to be methodologically rigorous and know the conventions of the methodology you're working in and let that guide you to know kind of when you're done. When it comes more to writing pieces and perspectives, commentaries, that kind of stuff, again, I think teams are really helpful. Getting the feedback from the different people you're writing with, working on things with, hearing their questions, responding to those questions, going back and forth. And I think once the questions start to dry up, you start to kind of go, okay, I think we're done. And then the other piece for me would be just kind of remembering that I think perfection is a little bit the enemy of progress. The reality is anything you submit, I mean, unless it gets desk rejected, which happens plenty. I've been there. I'm sure you've been there. But most things get peer reviewed. And so you're going to get peer review. You're going to get comments. You're going to get 2 or 3 different perspectives with tons of ideas. You're going to end up rewriting huge chunks of it anyway. And so it's often is it good enough? Is this good enough to get to peer review? I think trying to make it perfect is a bit of a fool's errand. And so for me, it's methodological rigor, trusting your team and remembering that good enough is okay. They're probably the things I lean on to kind of know that I'm done.
So Carol, what did you think?
I mean, I love the question to begin with. It's something that I struggle with a lot, at knowing when I'm done writing basically anything. And it's kind of nice to hear that our experts also tend to struggle with that. And I came away with a lot of really good advice. I mean, there's the part of it that's just practicality and practice and kind of your gut feeling. I agreed with Meredith. Sometimes it's just kind of like, I can't look at this anymore and I have to be done. But also their advice about talking to other people, getting somebody who isn't bogged down on your work, that's looking at it as much as you are to tell you, this is good, it can move on. And then things with the publications, knowing that, yeah, there's a whole other peer review process that it's never going to be done. Somebody else is going to have something to say. And like Dr. Saini said, you know, the beauty of science is that it's never done. And then in the converse end of that, what Robert said with perfection is kind of the enemy of progress. You're not going to move on. So keeping those things in mind, remembering that methodology exists and you can look back and say, you know, I finished that. Or that, as was mentioned a few times, if you feel like you know what you're contributing, you have your therefore statement, you know it's done, you're done. So it's kind of good reminders.
Did it feel reassuring watching all of that?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm currently struggling with this, writing my comps, knowing that it is enough, this is okay. And my supervisors will say the same thing. I constantly come up with them and I say, how much more do I need? And they're like, it's fine, just breathe. So hearing what the experts had to say was very reassuring.
No, that's helpful. And I remember once I took a class during my PhD, and I don't remember what methodology we were talking about. Like it was a qualitative methods class. And we were talking about a certain methodology. And I raised my hand and I was like, so how do you know when you're done? Because with some methodologies, they talk about like, oh, when you reach saturation.
It's an iterative process.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All of that language. And so one of them, there wasn't really anything mentioned. And so I raised my hand. I was like, so how do you know when you're done? And I'll never forget the prof just shrugged at me. They're like, well, like it depends.
You don't. You keep doing it until it feels done, I guess.
Yeah. And maybe that's the philosophy that we need moving forward is just, well, we've got some helpful hints from this episode and maybe we take those into account as well. But also sometimes it really is just a feeling.
Yeah. I think a feeling feels right. And then, of course, the external feedback is just great.
Yeah.
It's good. Maybe your prof, if he was like, this is it, you're done, it would have felt a little bit better than
some external validation or
Yeah.
something of the sort, like someone stamping it being like, you are done now.
It's over.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll get that, like as a student or as a team member, like someone else, as you said, will come in and be able to like give you that validation that you need that it's done.
Yeah. I think somebody mentioned it, like a good dissertation is a done dissertation. I think that's the goal I have in mind for the next few years.
I don't want to brag, but that was me. So
Perfect.
yeah, amazing.
It must have been you. It was great.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Is there anything else that you wanted to chat about? Anything else that you wanted to talk about in relation to the episode or things that kind of came through?
I think the good enough idea was also good. I think as many people mentioned that we all can be perfectionists. We really want things to be just so good. I tend to think that I'm a perfectionist, and every time I look at something I wrote 2-3 years ago, maybe even a few months ago, I'm like, what the heck is this? But at the time, it was good enough, and it still is good enough. So remembering that it's good enough.
Exactly.
It's done. It's over.
Exactly. And you're going to feel that way when you're done your dissertation too, in the same way that a good dissertation is a done dissertation. A done dissertation is a good enough dissertation.
Yeah, I'm sure people go back if they ever read their dissertations again. And they're like, what the heck did I write here?
Exactly. They do. I can attest to that as someone who has gone back and looked at it. I can attest to it.
At least you've looked at it again.
Yeah. I didn't get too sick of it, which was good.
That's
so
good.
We'll see where you end up in a couple of years.
Fingers crossed. Hopefully I'm not sick of it.
Hopefully.
I think, hopeful.
Hopeful.
I think that might be it. Oh, actually.
Yeah, go.
The dissemination aspect, I never really thought about the fact that that's where the work really is never done because it's out there, whether you're presenting it or people are reading your work. There is an element of uncertainty and done in that sense. That was also a nice reminder.
Yeah. There's always going to be a time to like talk about work that you've done. Or I'm sure when you talk with folks, faculty, other students, maybe there's work that they've published. It could be years ago and it's still being talked about. It's still relevant, or they're producing new knowledge products related to that work. Like that mobilization work really doesn't end.
Absolutely. And sometimes they move on and years later you come back to it because you have a new idea that kind of came out of what you've done before, and then were you ever really done with it? Yeah.
Was there anything that someone maybe didn't mention that you were expecting or didn't say that you were hoping for in terms of maybe insights that you've learned from other people or from colleagues or friends?
I think there is just the element of taking a step back with your own work. One, maybe you get that negative feeling like Meredith was saying, but I didn't hear a lot of taking a step back, taking time, doing something else, and then you yourself coming back to the work and feeling okay with it.
That's a really important piece too, because like we need those breaks for a multitude of reasons, right? Sometimes it's just to rest our eyes, but literally sometimes more thinking cannot happen until we've been removed from that thing for a bit.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And with that, Carol, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
And to everyone else that's watching and listening, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you for the next episode of Ask 5.
Why does a duck have feathers?
I don't know.
To cover its bum quack.
He would probably love that.
Beautiful.
Are we going to take it again? I'm just going to let Robert go. Sorry. You're just looking at Monica.
I'm not looking here. I'm looking here.
Just grill Dylan the whole time.
Just looking at a camera. Look at the camera.
You're talking to Monica.
Okay, I'm going to turn this way.
And what would you do with said dinosaur then?
Like, what wouldn't I do with that dinosaur? We'd go to the grocery store.
You like tie him up to a little like parking pole outside. You're
Totally.
Like, wait out here.
Yeah, you hold, wait, and I'd give him a leash, right? Like, obviously, I'd give him a leash, but I'd put it at the end of his tail because I'm never going to get up there and unclick it for him.
It's supposed to be very good for you to eat fermented food. So I'm disappointed.
Dylan,
Bless you.
honestly,
Bless you.
whoa, that's what it sounded like in the back.
And if I was in a movie theater and I couldn't run around, the most inopportune time, I'd go grab like whoever was next to me.
Yeah.
And, whether I knew them really well or not.
You would just grab people. See? We did it. All done. Yeah, I know.